So the phase 2 clinical trial was primarily a safety study. So in neurology drug development, safety is really the go, no-go decision. So without a drug that is well tolerated in this group of stroke patients, we were never going to be able to progress the drug further in clinical development. From a clinical development point of view, to get the drug actually approved, safety was really the first thing that we needed to show. And then we were looking at signals of efficacy. So we actually had a really wide range of efficacy signals that we were looking at. First thing we were looking at was infarct volume. So this is the amount of brain injury that we were seeing on brain imaging of these patients at 48 hours post-drug administration. And we were looking at this both across the board, but also in some subgroups that related to the amount of blood flow that those patients had. So pleasingly, we saw a 15% reduction in the most at-risk patients that have what we call slow collaterals. These are patients whose strokes are actually progressing pretty quickly from the time of stroke onset. So really exciting to see an efficacy signal in brain injury in those patients. We also had a raft of functional outcome measures that we were looking at both at day 30 and also at day 90. So we actually didn't expect to see much because it was such a small study, and functional outcomes usually take more patients to actually power them to see any different. We have seen some really exciting functional outcome improvements across all patient groups, and we're seeing a clear trend emerging from the treatment group versus the placebo. Some of the things that we were looking at cognitive impairment. So this is assessing the patient's cognitive function at day 90 post-stroke. From a quality of life point of view, this is a really key functional outcome measure that we look at. So we saw a 23% difference in the ARG-007 treatment group in terms of improvement versus the placebo group. So that's really encouraging. And then we looked at what we call the Bartel index. So this is looking at a patient's ability to perform daily activities independently. And what we saw from day 30 to day 90 is a marked improvement in the trajectory of functional outcome improvement as measured by this Bartel index in that treatment group. So that was around a 22% differential from day 30 to day 90. The reason we look at day 30 to day 90 is because a lot of the natural recovery has already occurred by day 30. So seeing a difference at day 30 to day 90 really kind of gives us an indication that it's the drug treatment effect that's working. Really pleasing to see, the most at-risk patients with that brain injury reduction, but also across the board, we're seeing this functional outcome improvement, which we really didn't expect to see. So really pleasing that we've seen those trends. When we take this drug through the later stages of clinical development into what will be known as a registrational pivotal phase 3 trial, the primary endpoint will be functional, and that is really dictated by regulatory agencies such as the FDA. They want you to show that your drug is actually improving the quality of life of patients. And so the way that we do that is these functional outcome measures. So a patient's quality of life, it's often on patient-reported outcomes. Do they feel like their cognitive performance has declined, or does it feel like they're kind of in the normal range? And we have a whole raft of validated tests. Really what we're trying to do with any drug development really is to change the quality of life of that patient. That's really the end game. So we use surrogate biomarkers in earlier stage clinical trials. So the infarct volume on imaging is essentially measuring the extent of brain injury that we see in these patients we did 48 hours post-stroke. So we are seeing that impact in those slow collateral patients. But ultimately, to get the drug approved, we will need primary endpoints around functional outcomes. That's why it's so exciting that we're actually seeing this trend in functional outcomes, because ultimately that'll be the thing that will get this drug approved, not the infarct volume. But we will continue to look at infarct volume as that sort of surrogate biomarker. But what infarct volume tells us, it only tells us how much brain cell death is occurring in that patient. It doesn't tell us the extent of neuroinflammation. It doesn't tell us the extent of the synaptic plasticity, the ability for those brain cells in that still salvageable brain area to change. And we do believe ARG-007 is obviously having an impact on those areas outside of what we can directly image in these patients. Again, that's why functional outcomes really are so important. The fact that we're seeing efficacy in some validated functional outcome measures, what we will do now is we'll go to the FDA and we'll talk through this data and get agreement around what the endpoints should be in that phase 2B trial. So potentially switching them into more functional outcome endpoints as opposed to infarct volume endpoints, and working with the FDA around what are the most relevant functional outcome endpoints. We'll get a lot of input from clinicians around those endpoints as well. There is a little bit of disagreement among some clinicians at the moment around what is the most relevant. If you just measure disability, that really only signifies impact to the motor cortex. Do you need to do broader, like the Bartel Index, which actually looks at not only disability but cognitive impairment and the ability to perform daily activities, bring in that cognitive impairment measure as well. So there's a lot of consultation that we need to do around these trends that we're seeing in this functional outcome, but this data will really drive how we design that phase 2B trial. The other thing we'll look at really is these collaterals. So there's a lot of literature coming out just how important the collateral blood flow is in stroke patients and how important that is for the design of a neuroprotective drug trial. All this information, we're so much better off at the end of this phase 2 than we were at the beginning. We know so much more about where we think this drug really is going to work, and the next trial will really hone in that design to give it the best chance of success. I think pharma partners will find this data really exciting because obviously they know that functional outcomes really is the primary endpoint, the thing that we need to get to that drug registration. And not only having infarct, which is obviously showing there's a treatment effect there, but having the data on the trends in functional outcomes. And it's not just one functional outcome measure, the trend is across the board. It'll give them sort of a lot of confidence, not only around how the drug is working, but also the trial design, where we can really hone in on that trial design to, as I said, give it the best chance of success. We're still doing a lot of the data analysis. There's some interesting things that we're seeing in the data that we want to also hone in on a little bit more. We are working with a UK company called Brainomics. They've got a tool that uses AI to look at more granular level of that imaging to see if we can see what's happening outside of that infarct as well. So we're working with them really closely to extract as much data out of the imaging as we can, really to give us a sense of where the drug is working in these patients. We'll look at things like collateral blood flow in that as well. Currently finalising the clinical study report, which the FDA will want to see as well. Finalised studies to lift our IND clinical hold. So now till the end of the year, there's a lot of data analysis, a lot more work that we're sort of doing really to help us hone in on that phase 2B trial. A lot of discussions back with pharma companies that we've already had initial discussions with to show them the data and get them interested in as well. So yeah, a lot going on from now to the end of the year, and then next year we'll be able to come out and let the market know what the plan is for the phase 2B trial.